Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is New York City Councilmember Tiffany Caba. Councilmember, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Big news over the past couple of weeks has really rocked New York City, and I would love to get your take on it. Mayor Eric Adams last week was indicted on 5 federal charges involving campaign finance, bribery, and conspiracy after allegedly accepting illegal campaign donations from the Turkish government. You said on social media, you read the 57-page indictment. You're a former public defender, so from that perspective, what sticks out to you?
Yeah, that's right. I did read all 57 pages, and it's quite the document. And I was a public defender for over 7 years, so I represented people on everything from jumping the turnstile to homicides. Two things. I mean, a few things come up, but the two major things are, from the lawyer perspective, what this indictment means and breaking that down for people who just don't understand what's being alleged, and I can talk through that. And then also, what does the indictment, first ever in New York City history, of a sitting mayor mean for everyday people in New York who depend on government services day in and day out? So, from the lawyer perspective, this indictment, it's a range of charges, but if I break it down like really simple, and we've been doing this a lot on social media so that people understand, the federal government is alleging behavior over the span of a decade since he was the Brooklyn Borough president, and that he's been over this time building relationships with foreign nationals and governments. And Turkey is one of the countries, but we also know that they are investigating a number of other countries as well. And I anticipate seeing what we call a superseding indictment, which means a new indictment that adds charges as they continue to execute these search warrants. But essentially, this 57-page indictment says that he allegedly took hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of these quid pro quos, right? These, fancy flight and hotel upgrades and gifts from Turkey. And then I think the thing that is actually the most troubling allegation is that they are alleging that he laundered foreign money into campaign donations. So, to protect our democracy and our elections, it is illegal for people who don't live in the United States to put money into our campaigns. And it's extra bad in New York City, where we have what we call public matching, right? And so every time New Yorkers donate to a city campaign, their public funds are matched 8-1. And so if they laundered that money to make it look like foreign donations were from New York, then they allegedly stole money from taxpayers because that money was being matched 8-1. So now he's being criminally charged for those things. It is highly, highly, highly distracting for the biggest job in the country, probably, besides our president and whatnot. And it's we've seen a mass exodus of his high-ranking officials in his administration. And so what's happening is we're seeing government be affected, and he can't effectively be the mayor of the city at this point.
The indictment really lays out, as you said, a damning case of quid pro quo. But we are a country where due process is a thing. You're innocent until proven guilty. But you've been calling for his resignation since the middle of September, when these multiple federal allegations were swirling around him. Why are you calling that before he gets his day in court?
Yeah, that's right. And I love that you asked this question, because I actually don't think it's the right question, but it's the human one, right? I am a public defender through and through. I made a career out of believing in and protecting and fighting for our Constitution, particularly the constitutional right to the presumption of innocence, the constitutional right to due process. But as for the call for resignation, which I was the first city official to do that a week before he was indicted, that's not the question at hand. He deserves his day in court. He deserves a robust defense, and the question before us on whether he should resign or not is whether during this moment he can effectively govern and deliver for New Yorkers. This is not about his maybe or maybe not criminal guilt and whatever comes out of the criminal legal system process and whatever accountability looks like in that process. This job is separate. You do not have a constitutional right to your job, and this is a job that is one of a public servant, and people rely every single day. So I called on it even before the indictment, but with all of these things were swirling and the investigation was happening, not just because of these investigations, but also it was the culmination of things, right? It was also because 15 plus of his top aides were being investigated by the FBI as well. It was because we were seeing a mass exodus of high-ranking officials, like I mentioned, leave. And then you put that together with, over the span of time that he's been in office, we have seen him cutting budgets year over year, right? So now our city agencies, they're cut to the bone. We're running city agencies on skeleton crews. They don't have enough employees. They don't have enough funding. We have seen cuts to sanitation. We have seen cuts to education. We have seen cuts to homeless services. The list goes on and on. In fact, there was a point in time where he was trying to cut the oversight budget by by almost a half. And the oversight budget is like Department of Investigations, Board of Corrections. They're the agencies that do the investigations internally to make sure things are on the up and up. And so you ask the question of a mayor, like, why wouldn't you want people to get a look under the hood? All of those things are deeply concerning. And from a constituent perspective, what does that mean for the people that I represent? I have constituents that walk into my office that apply for food stamp benefits, for SNAP benefits is what we call them, and they're waiting 3 months to get those approved. That's the difference between going hungry and having food. I have constituents who are, have a housing voucher, right? A housing subsidy that if they're struggling with housing precarity, they go through the really, really impossible task of finding a New York apartment, which is already hard for most of us, but add a voucher for that and it's really hard. And then the government isn't doing their side of the paperwork in time and they're losing apartments. That's the difference between being sheltered and being homeless. Parents, we were promised universal 3K and pre-K and they're not getting seats for their kids. Or if they are getting seats, I have some of my parents saying, well, I got a seat, but it's in Greenpoint. I can't go from Astoria to Greenpoint to drop off my kid to school. And so these are the everyday things that are impacting folks.
To the point of your constituents coming into your office, talking to you about this, I live in New York City. I was out and about the night that he was indicted. Everyone's phone went off with the news and everyone was talking about it. What are your constituents in Queens saying?
Yeah, I mean, again, they are communicating with us that they're really frustrated. And it's a culmination of frustrations because they were frustrated when the mayor took money from the libraries and our libraries were closed on Sundays, right? They were frustrated when they applied for pre-K and 3K and were promised seats for their kids and they didn't get them. They've been frustrated when you walk around our parks and to our street corners and you can tell that there is less service on the sanitation side. And so they see this and it's just not just frustrating, it's angering. It also erodes trust. And then, the flip side of that is that constituents have come and said that they are grateful for the work that, we're doing in our office, my staff is doing, one, to communicate, right? I think one of the things that we prioritize is kind of lifting the veil and really letting people know what's going on inside of City Hall and in these government, in a way that isn't really the norm. And also how we're just fighting to make sure that we are maintaining and strengthening service to the best of our ability under these really unprecedented circumstances. Like, it does not have to be this way. That's the other thing. People, knowing that this isn't the norm, and in fact, this is sort of historic in its dysfunction.
It's really, it is historic. It is unprecedented. The New York economy is larger than some economies of small countries. So I think to wrap your head around this is just, it is a lot. And you were the first council member to call for his resignation. Since then, it opened up a bit of a floodgate. But what has the conversations been like with your colleagues, with fellow council members across the aisle even?
Yeah. I'm going to answer that, and I just want to add into the mix that you're right. We have one of the largest economies in the entire world. We're the richest city, and we could be robustly funding our social safety net, social services, all these things that are proven with evidence to make us safer and healthier, but we don't. Instead, under this administration, what we have seen is a propping up and an increase in NYPD abuses, which has led to a lot of lawsuits. We are seeing unprecedented amounts of overtime charges. So even just the sheriff's office, there was new reporting saying that they spent $5 million in overtime and also are being investigated for
stealing money during raids, right? Like this is the kind of dysfunction we're talking about. So you take that 5 million, you take the police misconduct settlements, you take the public matching funds, again, allegedly that were taken from taxpayers that could have gone into investments into our kids, our parks, our schools, our hospitals. We have the money for these things, but it's how we're spending them. And I think the consensus across my colleagues, no matter where they land on the political spectrum, is that this is deeply frustrating. It's very distracting. This is a big job that requires all of your attention all of the time, and that nobody wins here. And I can't say that firmly enough. Like, yes, I have disagreements with the mayor's priorities up to this time, and yes, I've called for him to resign, and I don't call for that lightly. But this is an untenable moment, and if and when he resigns or gets removed, that transition is a heavy lift, and nobody wins in that. It's going to take all of us coming together and being unified and making sure that we're stabilizing the government so that we're in a place to improve government services, regain the trust of our communities, and get back on track.
To your point, I had a conversation last week with Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, who's a Republican who represents Staten Island, and she said she called for his resignation and said, I would prefer the New York City public advocate to be the interim mayor who's more liberal in her eyes than Mayor Eric Adams, because the situation feels so untenable, because she has lost such confidence in his leadership. But I did speak to one of your colleagues, Councilmember Areola, earlier this week. She told me that she believes that Adams' legal problems started when he adopted a tougher rhetoric on migrants. She said the timing is suspect, and she also said this, that she's hearing calls to resign, quote, mostly from the radical far left, and, quote, of course they want to take over, of course they want to dismantle the police, of course they want to take away any type of law and order that we have. You hear that, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we obviously disagree. We're on other sides of the political aisle. I think these allegations that this is politically motivated, they are just right out of sort of the Trump MAGA right-wing playbook rhetoric, right? It's what he relied on to say that the election was, fraudulent. It's what he continues to rely on, and we're just not going to give that a lot of air. Again, I was a career attorney before coming into city government, and I know what these investigations take and look like. And like I said, they don't do this lightly, especially when it comes to executive elected officials. These are they have to gather enough information to put in front of a judge. That judge, which by the way, a lot of these judges were appointed by moderates, in our government. We don't really have quote unquote, leftists on the bench, and they have to sign these saying, "Hey, I see enough evidence here to justify a search and seizure," which again is a constitutional right of protection against search and seizure. So there's enough information there that we can move forward in these processes. So I don't buy into that at all. I think we'll see how this all plays out, and it's going to take a while. And again, I just shift my focus to what can we do for our constituents in this moment. And yes, if the mayor were to be removed or resign, our public advocate would become the mayor, and I have confidence in his ability to reassure New Yorkers that while a transition will be hard, we're going to do the work together to make sure that we do what needs to be done for everyday New Yorkers.
And then after that, there would be a special election in less than 100 days. Is there anyone you support as of now who you think should be the next mayor? Should Adams step down? Should he resign? Should he get ousted?
Like I said, he should resign. He should resign immediately. If not, we should use the mechanisms to remove him, because New Yorkers can't wait, right? This is too important a position, and something needs to be done. As for who I would support in a mayoral race, the beautiful thing about elections is we get to see people put forth a vision for our city, and I will support the person who speaks most directly and most clearly to the needs, the hopes, the dreams of my constituents, of other everyday New Yorkers around the city, and who shows that they have enough institutional knowledge, managerial acumen to take what is a very bureaucratic job. Also, it's policymaking, it's bureaucracy, it's making sure the trash gets picked up every day. So looking for a combination of those things from a candidate
to support, and I'm eager to hear both visions around those things.
There's been a few names flying around, but as the investigations were swirling a few weeks ago, but before the indictment, I was speaking to a former top Governor Cuomo staffer, Melissa DeRosa. I asked for her comment on the situation, and she said that her phone was ringing off the hook, people telling her Cuomo needs to throw his hat in the ring, Cuomo needs to run. Do you think Governor Cuomo would be a good mayor? Is that someone you would support?
Absolutely not. Cuomo's reign, and I use the word reign because there is some parallels here between the way that he governed and the way that this mayor governed or is governing, is that they see themselves as king-like. And that's what gets you in these kinds of situations. I mean, Mayor Adams even said recently, I'm not resigning, I'm reigning. We are a democracy. We aren't, we don't have a king or a queen. This isn't, it just isn't, right? And Cuomo has been mired in scandals of his own, right? I think that it is not to be taken lightly, his very long history of sexual abuse allegations, and those types of actions. They speak to, again, the way that a person leads and governs and interacts with people in government. And not only that, but horrifically handled the pandemic response. We very concerned about the deaths that we saw in senior centers. And so I think it is time for Andrew Cuomo to step aside and let new leadership take place. And yeah, maybe there's a small group of people, his highest donors, who would want him to run. But the everyday New Yorker, I'm hearing from a lot of folks that the last thing they want is to see Andrew Cuomo as the mayor of New York City.
So what's next? Because we saw this bombshell news last week. It almost seems to be a bit of at a standstill. Adams is saying, I'm innocent, I'm defending myself, I'm not resigning. What are you doing next as a council member?
Yeah. I mean, again, just trying to make sure that we're delivering the services we need to our constituents, continuing to communicate, coordinating with my colleagues to see what we can do to deliver the best services for New Yorkers. But I just want to point the fact that he says, I am going to fight this tooth and nail with everything I've got. That should be, and he should. If I'm his defense attorney, that's exactly the kind of energy I want him to bring to his defense. But that means that if he's fighting tooth and nail with everything that he's got, he is not giving everything that he's got to being the mayor of New York City. And during a presser a few days ago that he gave, he said, well, I'm just going to pass this off to my lawyer. He's going to handle all this stuff, and I'm going to be the mayor. I'm going to do that job. Defense attorney here to tell you that's impossible. When you are putting together a defense on behalf of your client, the most important thing you need is for your client to assist in their own defense. And with these kinds of charges that are laid out in the indictment, only the mayor, only Eric Adams holds a lot of the information that's needed to craft the defense, because a lot of this is about communications, right? Individual communications, and whether he had the intent and did in fact accept these things or ask for certain things illegally. And so they can't be separated. So yes, you're being charged criminally. You should put forth a robust defense. And also, we need a mayor that can do the job of the mayor right here, right now. And both cannot be true.
Well, the situation certainly will see some developments. And as they do, I hope you come back on. I hope you provide your comment and break it down with us. New York City Councilmember Tiffany Caba, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.